How central banks engineered the illusion of prosperity. We've been told that growth is good, that inflation is normal, and that recessions are just temporary storms in the vast ocean of progress. But what if the prosperity we see, the booming stock markets, the rising home prices, the cheap credit isn't real? What if it's all engineered? Behind every financial miracle of the past century lies a hidden mechanism, the modern central banking system. And while it promised stability, it quietly rewired the world's economy to depend on illusion. This is the story of how central banks built a house of prosperity on the shifting sands of debt, trust, and manipulation, and why it's beginning to crack. Origins. The birth of controlled money. To understand the illusion, we have to start where it began, in the chaos of the early 20th century. The Industrial Revolution had transformed economies, but money itself was still tied to something real. Gold. Each dollar, pound, or franc was backed by a promise, a physical reserve held in vaults. But gold had limits. Governments couldn't print it, and when wars came, World War I above all, those limits became chains. So, nations suspended gold convertibility and began printing notes far beyond their reserves. Central banks, institutions like the Bank of England, Reichsbank, and eventually the Federal Reserve were given the power to manage this new money. Their goal? Prevent collapse. Their method? Controlled inflation. And just like that, money stopped being a store of value and became a tool of policy. It worked at first. Economies revived. Credit expanded, but beneath the surface, a dangerous dependency was forming. Prosperity now depended not on productivity, but on printing. Rise. The age of monetary magic. After the devastation of World War II, the global financial order was rewritten at Bretton Woods in 1944. The United States, holding most of the world's gold, anchored the new system. Every major currency would be pegged to the US dollar, and the dollar itself would be convertible into gold. For a time, it seemed to work. The post-war era. The 1950s and 60s brought unprecedented growth. Factories thrived, wages rose, and middle classes blossomed. Politicians hailed it as proof of modern economic mastery, but underneath, something strange was happening. The more central banks intervened, cutting rates, injecting liquidity, manipulating supply, the more the system demanded. By the late 1960s, U.S. gold reserves were draining fast as other countries demanded conversion. The illusion of balance couldn't hold. In 1971, President Richard Nixon severed the dollar from gold, a move known as the Nixon shock. Overnight, money became purely fiat, backed by nothing but trust. The new experiment had begun. Now, central banks could expand credit infinitely. Prosperity no longer needed productivity. It needed belief. The breaking point. Prosperity by design. The 1970s exposed a flaw in this newfound freedom. Without gold as a constraint, governments spent recklessly. Inflation soared. Prices doubled and tripled within years. To tame the chaos, central banks adopted a new doctrine: monetary policy, the art of raising or lowering interest rates to steer the economy. At its head stood Paul Volcker, the Federal Reserve Chairman, who, in 1979, unleashed shock therapy on the system. By raising interest rates to nearly 20%, he crushed inflation, but at the cost of a severe recession. Yet Volcker's cure cemented a new kind of power. Central banks had proven they could move entire economies with a single decision. From then on, politicians deferred, markets obeyed, and the illusion of control grew stronger. The prosperity of the 1980s and 90s, the long boom, was not organic. It was manufactured through credit expansion and financial deregulation, both orchestrated by central banks that promised eternal growth. It wasn't real wealth. It was leverage dressed as success. Fallout. when the illusion cracked. The illusion began to fracture in 2008. Years of cheap credit had inflated a global housing bubble. Banks lent to anyone with a pulse, repackaging bad debt into safe securities. When the truth came out, the system nearly collapsed. This was the ultimate test for the masters of money. Central banks around the world, from the Federal Reserve to the European Central Bank and Bank of Japan, unleashed quantitative easing, printing trillions of dollars to buy toxic assets and government debt. Markets recovered. The illusion survived, but something irreversible changed. We entered a new era, one where prosperity was sustained not by productivity, but by perpetual intervention. Central banks became the buyers of last resort, the lenders of last resort, and eventually the markets themselves. And while economies appeared to stabilize, inequality exploded. The rich, who owned assets, grew richer. The rest fell behind, because when money is created from nothing, it flows to those who already control the system. Failed fixes. Prosperity at any cost. After 2008, the illusion deepened. Every crisis was met with the same solution: print more, borrow more, spend more. When the pandemic struck, in 2020, central banks printed over $30 trillion globally, more money in 1 year than in the previous 2 centuries combined. Stock markets soared, housing prices exploded, and politicians bragged about resilience. But beneath the surface, the damage was severe. Supply chains broke, inflation roared back, and debt reached historic levels. By 2023, the illusion of prosperity had turned into its opposite: a fragile economy addicted to stimulus, unable to function without constant monetary morphine. Central banks promise soft landings, but history shows every artificial boom leads to a natural bust. And this time, the foe may not be one they can print their way out of. Modern parallels. The system consumes itself today. Global debt has surpassed $315 trillion, tripled the world's GDP. The average citizen is burdened by mortgage, loans, and taxes, all tied to interest rates set by unelected central bankers. Manuel. Hianuil. The same institutions now propose central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, programmable money with full traceability. They say it's for safety, stability, and efficiency. But look closer, and it's the ultimate illusion, a system that offers convenience in exchange for control. Once, prosperity meant independence. Now, it means compliance. And the very institutions that engineered the illusion of wealth are preparing to redefine what money even is. Three takeaways and a warning. First takeaway: prosperity without productivity is an illusion. Every printed dollar erodes the link between effort and reward. Second takeaway: central banks didn't solve the crises. They postponed them. Each rescue created the conditions for the next collapse. Third takeaway: the future of money is not about wealth, but control. As digital currencies replace cash, financial freedom may disappear silently.